Thank you for the invitation, UNU-WIDER. It's a pleasure to be here and sharing this research within this audience, sharing the panel with you, colleagues. And today I'm going to present one of the key pieces of my research during my PhD that was published as a working paper that the UNU-WIDER series, and thanks also for the comments of Amina and other colleagues within the paper. And the paper, the context of the paper and the main motivation of the paper relies mainly on the title of this panel, how we understand taxation as fair social contribution. And relates also with how our previous colleague Grace was telling us in terms of how the tax system works at the taxpayer level, and trying to understand how do we understand the effectiveness in terms of progressivity within the complete tax system. We know currently that in the developing world, we rely mostly in indirect taxation, and we understand that that is a proxy of tax regressivity within the tax systems. And also in terms of evidence, the last literature shows us that the economies that reveal that the bottom of the income distribution are paying more taxes in proportion to their income compared to the 1% of the income distribution. That shows us in terms of when we analyze the microdata, we understand that this is something that is happening. However, currently there's no an instrument, an index in the literature that can show us directly what is the proportion between these groups, between the richest of a population, if we can conceptualize them as the richest 1%, compared to the bottom percent of the distribution. That is something similar to what Gabriel Palma did in terms of the Gini coefficient, that he challenged the Gini coefficient, telling us that the problem of inequality was not in the tails. Sorry, the problem of inequality was in the tails, but not in the middle of the population, that we should study what is happening within the differences in terms of income within the richest and the bottom of the population. So what I try to do in this paper is try to mimic that analysis and compare and try to check whether the logic of the Palma index for measuring inequality also fits for the analysis of tax progressivity. Is the problem of tax progressivity within the tails and not in the complete income distribution? And that's how I test the hypothesis that this is mainly the case. So my argument is that the current instruments for measuring tax progressivity do not focus the analysis explicitly on this relationship. In the paper, theoretically, I develop a concept that is called vertical progressivity. I included the concept of vertical equity within the analysis of tax progressivity, and the understanding that vertical equity aims theoretically that the ones that are in the bottom of in the top of the distribution should be paying more taxes than the rest of the population. Therefore, what we observe now is that there's the debate from after the Washington Consensus onwards, we focus a lot in the design of tax policy in terms of having more tax neutrality and horizontal equity within the tax system. And we didn't explore that much what was happening in terms of progressivity. That is something that is started to revert within the last years. So I define vertical progressivity as a characteristic of the tax system that reflects whether the richest 1% of the population are paying more taxes than the bottom of the distribution. And for this, I aim to consider all the complete tax structure. I mean, the different personal income tax, corporate income tax, VAT, excise taxes, etc., etc. Then I jump for a conceptual framework. In terms of theory, I try to analyze the different indexes that we have in the literature. There are ones that try to measure the effective aspects of the tax redistribution, and then we have like Kaukani as the one most noticeable and most used in terms of for measuring tax progressivity. Suits, it's something very similar to Kakwani. Then we have the structural measures that the intention is to measure how the changes in the legislation, mainly in the marginal rates of the legislation, make changes within the progressivity of the tax systems. Both have pros and cons in order to analyze the extent of the riches of the population, how much they are paying, mainly in terms of the effective measures, and why I used the Kaukani afterwards to test the hypothesis on whether the problem is in the 1% compared to the bottom, is that in the case of the Kaukani, although they analyze the complete tax system, they include the different taxes. The problem is that they do not prioritize in relation to the 1% with the bottom distribution. It's similar to the problem of the Gini coefficient, that they analyze the progressivity within the complete tax system, from the richest of the population to the bottom, but trying to understand what is happening with the different points. And it's something that is not very intuitive, as I will showcase at the end of the presentation. And in terms of the structural measures, they usually rely only on specific aspects of the tax system, particularly the personal income tax or other taxes, but they exclude some very important aspects of the taxation, and mainly the VAT, that is super important for the understanding what is happening in terms of progressivity, mostly in developing countries. So in terms of what is the progressive vertical index, it's a ratio in which it tries to measure what is happening in country I at moment T in terms of the average effective total tax rates of the top 1% of the population compared to the average effective tax rate of the bottom of the population. I describe the bottom of the population as the bottom 50% of the income distribution. Why I took the decision of include the 1 compared to the 50%, because, well, I ran different statistical analysis that gave us a very consistent standard deviations for saying that this should be the case to analyze. Then I also include an equality reward, and this is a second a progressive vertical index adjusted, that I try to correct the results of the PVI, the PVI, considering what is happening in terms of the income of the initial levels of equality of the country. That's a critique that some works have received, that try to analyze the income distribution with pre-tax records, like with the incomes previous to taxes. And the problem that tries to solve this is to recognize that the equality or the progressivity of a country can be driven by the initial levels of equality and not because of the tax system. That's why I include this as a following the work of other colleagues, López Calva, Eduardo Ortiz Juárez, and others. So this is the data that I use, that contains 10 countries of Latin America. Thanks for colleagues of Mauricio de Rosa, Ignacio Flores, and Mark Morgan. The structure of the data, as can you see, it goes from the different percentiles of the population, from the 0.1 until the reaches 0.999% of the population, and it contains the effective tax rates, the total effective tax rates of the different percentiles, which allows me to calculate what is the average of the richest 1%, whereas compared to the bottom 99% of the distribution. I will not go into details of how they do calculate this effective tax rates, but they follow the distributional national account guidelines within the colleagues of the World Inequality Lab. So here you can see the comparison of my index with the Kaukani index. That is the same of comparing, well, not the same, but following the logic of the Palma index in relation to the Gini coefficient. And as you can observe, there's a high correlation between my index that tries to measure the progressivity of the 1% taxes paid by the richest of the population in relation to the bottom of the distribution. The correlation is higher than 92% in almost every country. So with this, I try to highlight that the importance of measuring the 1% with the bottom 50% is where the problem of progressivity is located within these developing countries. Moreover, I include this, as I was telling you before, I do a second analysis that includes and considers the equality of each country, like the starting point in terms of equity, in terms of the Gini coefficient, and I do a re-ranking that shows that different countries that were in the bottom, they are not anymore in the bottom, or in the other way around. For example, Colombia was ranked first in terms of progressivity, in terms of the PBI, and after applying the equality indicator, goes to the second place because it's more unequal than the other country. A second important point that I will highlight at the end of the presentation is that when we compare the results of the PBI with the Kaukani coefficient, the PBI is a very intuitive indicator that tells us how a country how the richest of a population are paying more taxes in relation to the bottom, in terms of when I tell you that a country is progressive in 0.0034 for the Kaukani, is different to understand. It's very difficult to understand what does that mean for a general audience. Whereas in case of the PBI, what I try to showcase, similar to the Palma Index, is that a country the richest of the population are paying X more or X less than the bottom of the distribution. That's how the index reflects the result. And the final contribution of the paper relates on that I create different bundles of taxes, of a specific PVI, a progressive vertical index of income taxes, wealth taxes, and indirect taxes, to understand the extent of progressivity within the different parts of the tax system. And here you can deliver very interesting comparisons. For instance, in the case of Argentina, the progressivity of the income tax system is higher than the progressivity of the income tax systems in Ecuador, and we can see how it evolves within time for the case of Ecuador. And this can showcase us different scenarios for testing further and understanding further what is happening within the tax system. So for finishing, almost just in time, the contrast between the PBI and the Kaukani Index suggests that the intuition behind the Palma Ratio Inequality Index applies to the analysis of tax progressivity, that the problem of achieving tax progressivity is in details of the distribution as well. Second, it helps to raise new questions. Why do some countries have upward or downward trends in terms of progressivity? How do tax reforms explain these changes over time? It also has some limitations. For example, we do not observe and we do not know what is driving these trends of progressivity. We cannot be sure that this is obtained because of tax compliance, state capacity, design, exemptions, etc. That is an avenue of further work in connection to the index. But as I was telling you before, the PBI offers an intuitive, transparent, and valuable tool for scholars and policymakers in the developing world for expand the analysis of tax progressivity, focusing on the vertical progressivity features. So with that, I finish my presentation. Thank you very much